April 2018. A clear morning over Volusia County, Florida. 3,000 feet. A commercial check ride halfway through the maneuvers. Then, a left wing, coming off the airplane on its own. 2 men died that morning. One was 25 and taking the test. The other was 61 and giving it. The airplane was a Piper Arrow. It was built in 2007. It had flown 28 hours since assigned inspection. Before this video is over, go and look up the airframe hours on your own airplane. Then put the number in the comments and tell me what it is. This is what Sky Ranch covers. Subscribe so you catch the next one. The wing did not fail where people expect a wing to fail. It failed at a row of bolt holes you cannot see. Every low wing Piper carries a piece of metal called the main spar. It is the beam that holds the wing onto the fuselage, and everything else on that wing is just hanging off it. At the bottom of that beam is a flat strip called the lower spar cap. The cap is drilled for the bolts that clamp the wing to the airframe. Those holes are the whole story. Metal does not break because you load it once. It breaks because you load it thousands of times. Each cycle opens a crack a fraction wider, and a drilled hole concentrates the stress right at its edge, which is exactly where the crack decides to start. The NTSB pulled that spar cap out of the wreckage and put it under a microscope. 3 separate fatigue cracks, all of them starting at attachment bolt holes. The report even numbers the 2 holes the cracks grew from, LC1 and LD1, because on a part like this, the exact hole matters, and the fatigue had eaten through more than 90% of the cap before the metal finally let go. More than 90%, on an 11-year-old airplane. Here is the number that explains it. That Arrow had 7,790 hours on the airframe. It also had 33,276 landings. Do that division and you get 4.33 landings for every hour flown. That is not a cross-country airplane. That is a training airplane going around the pattern all day, and every trip around the pattern is another load cycle into the same 6 bolt holes. The clock on a spar is not the tachometer, it is the landing gear. And this is the part I keep coming back to. The last inspection was signed off. The mechanic did his job, the paperwork was clean, the crack was already through 90% of the part, and it was sitting inside a joint the NTSB described as visually inaccessible. You cannot look at it. That is not a criticism of anybody. It is a description of the airplane. So the FAA did the only thing available. In January 2021, it published Airworthiness Directive 2021-2616 and told roughly 5,140 owners to stop guessing and start measuring. The tool is an eddy current probe. It runs a small alternating field into the metal and reads the disturbance that comes back, which lets an inspector find a crack under the surface without taking the part apart. The person holding it has to be certified to do it at level 2 or level 3, which is a trade of its own. Owners started sending the results back. By late 2022, the FAA had roughly 2,880 inspection reports in hand. And here is where the story stopped being about one accident. 115 airplanes came back with crack indications. Cracks were turning up at 3,164 hours. Well, under the 5,000-hour trigger the directive was built around, which meant the number the FAA had picked was wrong, and every airplane below it was unmeasured. So the agency went looking for why a spar cap on a modern Piper was cracking at all. And what it found was not a load case and not a design flaw in the shape of the part. It was a step on the factory floor. A wing does not sit flat. It angles up from the fuselage, and that angle is called dihedral. To build it, Piper took the spar and bent it cold. No heat, just force, applied to finished metal. When you bend metal cold, the metal fights you. The outside stretches, the inside squeezes, and when the press lets go, the 2 sides are locked against each other forever. Engineers call that residual stress. The part is already under load before the airplane has ever flown, and it is worst exactly where the bend passes through the bolt holes. In its 2024 rulemaking, the FAA put it in writing. Residual stress from the spar cold bending process is a significant contributing factor in reducing the fatigue life of the spar bolt holes. That sentence is doing a lot of work. It means the clock on these wings started running in the factory, not in the sky. Now here is the part that changed how I read this entire story. Piper fixed it. In 2023, the company put a redesigned spar into new production. The dihedral bend is machined now instead of cold bent. Cut, not forced. The residual stress never gets built in, and by the FAA's own account, those airplanes need none of these inspections. Same part, same airplane, different tool. The fix exists, it works, and it only goes on airplanes that were not yet built. That is the part that does not sit right with me. Which bothers you more, that the bend was done that way for 6 decades, or that correcting it came down to a different tool, because a fleet was already flying. In September 2024, the FAA published 2 proposed directives covering the PA-28 and PA-32. One covers 10,927 airplanes, the other covers 10,665, more than 21,000 aircraft. And for the first time in the history of these airplanes, the proposals put a hard number on the wing. An unmodified spar in the first group retires at 13,199 hours, the second group retires at 11,999. Reinforce the spar and you buy your way up to 25,000, not an inspection, a retirement date. The hours are not tachometer hours either. The formula counts every 100-hour inspection as 2 or 3 extra hours of life burned because a 100-hour inspection means the airplane is being rented or instructed in. A flight school Cherokee eats its limit 2 to 3 times faster than the same airplane in a private hangar. The airplanes that make new pilots are the ones being retired first, so an owner reaches the number. What happens next is simple. Replace the spar. The FAA published what that costs. $14,383 per wing, 40 hours of labor. For the pair, $28,766. A 1960s Cherokee 180 in decent shape starts around $28,000. Read those 2 numbers again because they are $800 apart. The wing repair costs more than the airplane it goes on. There is a second option, and it is worse. Piper offers a reinforcement kit. The kit itself is $4,000, but it takes 190 hours to install, so the FAA estimate lands at $20,150 per wing. $40,000 for the airplane. The cheaper fix is the one that replaces the whole part. And the kit cannot be fitted to the second group of airplanes at all. Those owners have exactly one road, and it ends at a new spar. So the obvious question is the one nobody seems to answer. Why does no one manufacture a Cherokee wing? The instinct is that it must be illegal. It is not. The rule is Title 14, Part 21, Section 21.9. It says that if you know a part is likely to end up on a certificated airplane, you cannot produce it unless it comes through an approved route, under a type certificate, under a production approval, under a parts manufacturer approval, which the industry calls a PMA, or built by the owner for the owner's own airplane. Those routes are open. People walk through them every day. Univair Aircraft Corporation in Colorado holds PMAs and manufactures Piper wing spars right now for Piper models. Univair does not own the type certificate on. Dakota Cub in South Dakota will sell you an entire PMA-approved Super Cub wing, built new, for between $9,800 and $16,800. Complete wings. Legally built. Bolted onto certificated airplanes. So the capability exists, the legal path exists, and the Cherokee wing still does not. The reason is arithmetic, and it is unglamorous. To earn approval for a structural part, you have to prove it will hold, and the drawings, the stress analysis, and the fatigue substantiation for the PA-28 wing belong to Piper. Anyone else starts from a blank sheet on a fatigue critical primary structure that the FAA is in the middle of assigning a life limit to. Nobody is going to fund that to serve a fleet whose airplanes sell for less than the part. The wing is not banned, it is not worth building, and a rule that makes something not worth building has the same effect as a rule that forbids it, except nobody has to sign anything. one man did test where that line sits. Roger Christensen, an Alaska bush pilot, rebuilt a 1977 Super Cub after a taxi accident using nothing but approved parts. The FAA revoked his airworthiness certificate on an emergency basis and came after him for $11,500. He fought it for about 2 years and spent roughly $50,000 in legal fees. He won. The administrative law judge wrote that it is completely permissible for a person to replace the wings and fuselage and any other part. That ruling is the clearest statement anyone has that this is an economic problem wearing a regulatory costume. It cost one man his savings to get it in writing. Now, before anybody takes this as settled, Piper does not accept the premise. The company filed a formal objection. Across roughly 40,000 airplanes and 200 million flight hours, field inspections turned up cracks in 6 aircraft out of 3,100. That is 0.1 run 94%, and Piper points out it is less than half the crack rate the fleet saw back in 1988. Piper traced all 6. 3 flew at the same flight school. 2 had heavily modified landing gear. 1 flew pipeline patrol. 1 had a wing attachment done wrong in maintenance, and 1 had been flown into severe weather. Piper put the cost of the proposal at between $347.8 million and $1.5 billion, and argued the FAA modeled shop labor at $85 an hour when the real number is $141. The FAA has a straight answer to that. 6 cracks is not the point. The point is that the failure mode is invisible to a normal annual inspection, and one of those cracks was found after the wing was already on the ground in 3 pieces. Both of those positions are supported. Neither has been withdrawn. As of this recording, no final rule has been published, which means every retirement number in this video is still a proposal and not law. That is the thing worth carrying out of here. An airworthiness certificate is not a document that says an airplane was built correctly. It is a standing permission to keep flying it, and that permission quietly depends on somebody, somewhere, still being willing to manufacture the parts. When the last supplier walks away, the certificate is still in the glove box, and the airplane is still in the hangar, and neither one is worth anything. Nobody revokes it. It just stops meaning what it used to mean. Once you see that, you will start seeing it in tractors, in machine tools, in the boat sitting behind your garage. And that is what Sky Ranch does. Subscribe so you catch the next one.